I'm Diego Sanchez, president of HousingWire, and I'm sitting in for Clayton Collins today on our Powerhouse podcast. I'm thrilled to welcome Marc Trachtenberg, CEO of Silk Title, to the Powerhouse podcast. Marc, so great to see you today.
Great being with you, Diego, and thank you for having me on the podcast this morning.
Yeah, it's really my pleasure. So before we dive in, I'd love for you to give a 30 to 60 second introduction of yourself and Silk Title. We'll dig in a little bit after your intro, but you've got a pretty interesting background.
I do. So I spent 10 years in mortgage lending, all the way from 2002 to roughly about 2011. Got into the title industry after making some major mistakes of my own mortgage company in 2008 to 2010, and thought I could do what everyone was doing and didn't realize how difficult it was, and got into the title space of it, and then really around 2013, 14, 15 realized that the only way to make it in the industry was to convert actually into a tech, AI, robotics type company that's commodity, happened to be title. And it was a scary bet. Like at that time in 2015 and 16, I wasn't sure that it was really going to pay off. We doubled down during COVID, and we were making ridiculous money as like everybody else was. And instead of just keeping that profit for myself or for just internal Silk, we doubled down on the AI, the robotics, the machine learning, and really tech. And what I realized was tech was no longer the cool thing. Right? It was, you already had to have that. The APIs, the integrations and everything. It was already an assumption that you had. And if you didn't, you were already behind the eight ball. And right around 2020, we doubled down on that robotic side of it. And we spent a lot of time, energy, and effort making a lot of mistakes while building it. And then when the rates skyrocketed, the good part is that we had that all built. So the scalability wasn't just about when the market's great. It was, I didn't need to go and fire everybody like a lot of my competitors had to do, because we were basically at a 6-to-1 to 7-to-1 ratio right now, where we need one employee to other 6 to 7. And that wasn't just why we built this. It was also about quality, turn times, and cost. Right. And we weren't banking on this whole AOL or Fannie going to this title alternative. We just said, hey, why is title and closing and settlement costing so much? And we had no clue that Fannie was going to go on that trajectory 12 months ago. We happened to fall into being right by doing what we had already been doing since 2020. So it's kind of where Silk came more of not just a title company, but more of really a platform.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to dig into that in a minute. It sounds like you had preparation meet luck there with the GSE experiments in title. But I want to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the title industry in general, and then dig into Silk Title. When I bought my first home, and I think many first-time home buyers go through this process, I had no idea what title was until I got to the closing table. Why do you think title is relatively mysterious compared to real estate, mortgage, and even appraisal?
Because no one knows what the functionality is. Everyone just thinks, oh, I need it. No one understands that 30 to 35% of that transaction is actually happening with the title and settlement. I mean, let's be honest. The two people who choose title right now is the loan officer, mortgage company, or the real estate agent. The borrower doesn't even know why they're doing it, other than I have to do it in order to get the home or in order to do the refi, right? So no one to this day, there's a huge educational gap as to the consumer, right? And to be honest with you, even the agent or LO doesn't 100% know why they need title, other than, hey, I got to utilize it to close the loan. A lot of people don't even understand the process behind it, right? So they just know I got to do it, and I accept whatever is on the purchase and sale contract, or I just accept it. And, no one really understands the cost behind it. No one really understands the why behind it. They just know they need it, right? And I hate to sound like that, Diego, but that's reality. There's such a lack of education, and you're starting to see that even within the walls of our own industry. Like, I don't really know if Fannie or Freddie 100% understand it, right? Other than we need to lower the cost of it. And let's be honest, there's a lot of smart people in this industry, and not everyone understands the why behind it. And now we're trying to take this risk and say, okay, just it's all about the cost. But what's really the validity behind the search, the exam, the curative, and everything, right? No one really understands that risk, but we're saying, hey, just lower the cost, right? And then it's how do you fundamentally lower the cost? You can't just add human beings to lowering the cost because that's a very high aspect of the cost, right? So I think some of that has boiled down to just simple education and really the borrower or consumer understanding the why it is that they need it. Like, think about it. There's how many pages in a closing document? How many borrowers actually read those 125 pages? And let's be honest, anyone who wants to change those 125 pages, unless you're going through a private mortgage, you ain't changing anything in those documents. It's just sign it in order to get the loan, right? What do people really look at? The closing disclosure and the CD. Do they really read any of the other documents within the closing package? The answer is no. And, the reality of it is I think there's a bigger piece of education that needs to happen into the title and settlement piece in order to really get to where everyone wants to go, which is a cheaper, faster mousetrap. But can you really get there if people don't understand the why?
Yeah, it's an interesting industry, and I've been at HousingWire for over 6 years at this point, and there have been several disruptors in the title space that we've covered in that time. But the big four still control more than 80% of the market. Why do you think they have such dominant market share in the title industry?
Well, let's be honest. There's a lot of lobbying going on right now. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. And there's a tremendous amount of lobbying, and that's part of the game, right? And they're needed. Let's not kid ourselves either. The big four are needed, right? You can't do and have the risk issue that's out there without them, right? I just think that the game needs to change a little bit about how it's being done and the cost behind that, right? And in order to really adopt what people are trying to adopt is let's not fight the big four. Let's not fight everybody. Instead, let's bring everybody together to figure out when certain things are applicable, right? When is AOL applicable and a good idea? When is traditional title applicable and a good idea? When maybe there's another product that comes out. I think instead of fighting as to trying to save themselves or ourselves, let's figure out when it is applicable because you could still be relevant, make money, and be successful as an organization by understanding those things. And I don't think anybody wants to take the time because everyone's in defense mode of which is, hey, we need to have it and it can't go to zero. Well, I don't think Fannie's message is that it's going to zero. I think Fannie's message is that we got to relook at how it's being done and how the cost is being driven to get there, right? Like one of the things I think is fascinating is UWM and the Track Plus program right now. It's great, but we've also done some comparison, and there's a lot of times where we are cheaper, but you don't always want to be cheaper. You also want to look at speed, right? Efficiencies, quality. Right? Cheapness doesn't always add up to all that stuff. So I don't think this is a game to be the cheapest. I think it's the game to be a cost-effective approach to being efficient and closing a loan in a timely fashion where it shouldn't take 60 days to close a purchase. It shouldn't take 30 days to close a purchase. It shouldn't take 30 days to close a refi, right? So I think some of these narratives, I don't think anyone's really defined what we're trying to do. And instead we're fighting on how not to lose out on revenue and how not to lose out on being a relevant company. And Diego, I could be 100% wrong, but that's how I'm viewing this right now. It's not going to zero. It's retooling what needs to be done. It's like if Blockbuster retooled, they wouldn't have lost the game. Right? If Netflix doesn't retool, they won't be relevant. It's retooling to stay relevant within the industry of what you're delivering. And that's how I see it. It doesn't mean it goes to nothing. It becomes what do you need and how do you stay relevant?
So let's talk about retooling and how you want Silk Title to compete against the big four and title alternatives, which we'll talk about more later on. How are you thinking about the strategy of Silk Title, with such market share dominance by the big four, with some disruption happening, with these experiments that the GSEs are taking on? What's your strategy for Silk Title to grow?
My strategy is to be really good at what we're really good at. It's not trying to be everything to everybody. Like right now, to sit there and think I'm taking down the big four is so irrelevant and crazy to me. I need the big four because guess what? The big four, three out of those four are my underwriters, right? So I'm not looking to compete with them. I'm looking to be a complement to them. I'm looking to be an advocate for them, but also helping them realize that at the end of the day, this industry is changing and we got to change with it. And in order to change with it, what is really necessary and what are we trying to do? Like, I don't want to be, not everyone is a client of ours. And I tell people that all day long, like, we don't fit for everybody. And guess what? It's okay to be the Pepsi to the Coke. Pepsi is just as relevant and is very successful. And would we like to be Coke? Of course we'd like to be Coke. But at the end of the day, if I'm Pepsi or Mountain Dew, I'm still as cool as anybody else and have been very successful. So it's a hard question to answer, Diego, because at the end of the day, you don't know, and you got to be able to be agile and nimble enough to pivot when necessary. But I tell people right now, we have a barbecue. We cook hot dogs, hamburgers, and sausages, and that's called purchases, refis, and HELOCs. But we're not trying to go out of that right now. And on top of it, not every one of those mortgage companies is going to fit in what we do. We're a national title company. I'm not here to compete against that local title company who's getting the agent at that local level. We actually want to help them become more effective and leverage Silk's technology and be a resource to them to create a better mousetrap. Right. So it's a different strategy. A lot of people have what I call the FOMO, the fear of missing out, the fear of missing out on revenue. Right. Not all revenue is good revenue for your company. Sometimes there is revenue that could be bad revenue and it could clog up what you're trying to do. And that's kind of what we made a decision on a few years ago, which is we only want to do certain things. And there's other great companies out there that do something different than us that can do it really better and more effective. And I think a lot of people in this industry are trying to do everything.
Mark, let's dig in a little bit more on your areas of focus. You mentioned tech enablement early in the conversation. You're a national title company. Let's talk a little bit more about those business lines for Silk Title and how you're planning on growing them.
Yeah. So obviously we have those cores of the refi, the purchase, and the HELOC stuff. We'll continue to build that platform as the environment's changed. But we are heavily looking at right now, even taking our tech stack to a whole nother level. And we are bringing in industry resources and experts on top of that. But one of the things we're seeing is the ability to potentially leverage our platform for other title companies and help them become better instead of always being looking at it as competitors, looking at how to help this industry as opposed to always looking at, hey, we got to fight each other, right? And saying, okay, what's never good for any industry, Diego, is people going out of business. Even though people think in my seat, oh yeah, you just gain market share. It's yes, you can do that, but too many companies going out of business or too many mergers or too many acquisitions happening, it's actually not as good for the industry as everybody thinks it is. So my feeling right now is let's leverage our platform and what we've spent the last years building and help other companies, right? Because at the end of the day, we're already ahead of that curve by gaining some of that market share. And my example being the Pepsi or the Coke. Hey, man, if I can help somebody else be the Mountain Dew and somebody else be, the Dr. Pepper, why not? Like, instead of always being adversarials to each other, let's actually be partners in this and leverage what we have to help others, right? Because if we're going to try and change this industry, you're not going to change it one individual at a time. We've got to change this as an organization and as a group of organizations to do that. And I really feel we're at the stage right now that it would make sense for us to take the product and take the tech and take that stack and potentially bring it to market. And really help others. And I know it's an odd strategy, but I think it's actually, if we're going to move this industry where it's trying to go, it's better to help others than it is just to be the only dog in the fight.
I see the jerseys behind you. I'm also a big Red Sox fan. And you had an event recently at Fenway Park called the RealEdge Summit. And it sounds like you were trying to bring mortgage and real estate and title into the same room, which is exactly what HousingWire tries to do with our events as well, especially our big event called The Gathering. The next one of those isn't until next June. But tell me a little bit about that first event that you did and what you were trying to achieve.
We're trying to get an understanding of what was going on and how others were seeing it. Sometimes you only get it from your lens because you are so inundated in what you're doing. And my thought process behind it, why we didn't make it a Silk event, Silk did sponsor it, but we wanted it to be different. That's why we called it the RealEdge, and that's why we're going to leave it at that, because we wanted other title companies. We brought in Stewart. We wanted others, not just mortgage lenders. We wanted industry, what we called industry experts, in a room to help figure out what's going on, right? Like, instead of thinking we knew it all, one of the worst things I feel you can do as an organization is think you know it all, right? I think one of the best things that came out of that summit was you had a lot of thought-provoking conversations. One of the things I think failed at in that is we didn't really come out of it with any solutions at that point in time. And I think one of the things, I always look at what I could do better, not just what did we do. And I think what went really well is we got a lot of people talking about a lot of these topics and the issues. What I think we got to do better is, maybe looking at what are some of those solutions. And we're going to probably piggyback off with another roundtable in a couple of months with what are those solutions, right? And it's always difficult, especially after today's news of the half-point rate drop, which is now everybody's going to start drinking from a fire hose a little bit. And how do you do that while everyone's concerned about the production?
Hopefully. Yeah, fingers are crossed on that. So I read your recent white paper that was focused on technology and innovation in the title industry. Why do you think so many closings are still done in person with big paper packages? Like, where do we go wrong with title that we're still kind of in the dark ages?
It's so funny you said that, because we just had this conversation at my office 2 days ago. I was like, COVID should have changed the world on hybrids with e-notes and RONs. And RONs are actually almost back to pre-COVID, right? Hybrids are maybe happening. It's the path of least resistance, Diego. It's like everything else. It's what do you know and what do you know how to do? We all want to be disruptors, right? Anybody wants to be relevant, wants to be a disruptor. But at the same time, where that failed, in my opinion, was the education of the consumer being able to utilize it and wanting to utilize it, right? And the path goes down, well, this is just what we know how to do, so therefore we did it. Now, Silk does find ourselves doing a lot more hybrids than probably the normal agency. We have the ability to do RON, but that's not on us. That's more on the lender. And it becomes a resource issue, it becomes an education issue, and it becomes a deployment issue, right? It becomes the execution behind it. And, people had a lot of those resources during COVID because the money was flowing in. So you had the opportunity to have those resources. The one thing that we found was those resources got depleted in a down market, and the focus shifted on just revenue generating functions, not efficiencies and everything else. And one of the things that came out of Silk was this turnkey solution, right? So one of the things we focused on, especially in the last 24 months, was how do you make it turnkey? Because when things are great, no one has the time to implement new things. And when things are slow, they don't have the resources to do it, right? So we decided, hey, what's a playbook to give you a turnkey solution? Yes, we can make it a little bit more robust over time. But going back to the question with hybrids and RONs and everything, I just think people got back to what was knowledgeable and what they knew how to do. It wasn't, okay, was it better? It was just, no, it was just what you know how to do. And the consumer really needed to be more educated as well. I mean, think about it. How many consumers have setups that allow for you to have the authentication, that have the right bandwidth of the internet, that have the right computer, right? Like, no one wanted to talk about that. We found out a lot about that during COVID. Is we get all the desires in the world, but the consumer's computer is not eligible to make it happen.
Yep. All right. So you're going to be joining us in Dallas in a couple of weeks at the HousingWire IMB Summit, and you're going to be speaking. What are you going to present to this audience, which is mostly going to be mortgage executives that will be in attendance, hundreds of mortgage executives that will be there?
I think our number one goal is to really bring to light the ability for a title company to be adaptable, right? And understanding what their needs are and really give some clarification on what these alternatives are and when they're applicable, right? Not just saying that it's the cool thing to talk about. Let's talk about when they're applicable, what's the risk factor behind it, what is really how to execute on it, and really what's the waterfall effect, Diego? Like when does it go to the easy path of an AOL? When does it go to traditional title? And how do you implement that? Because I think the hardest thing is the implementation behind things, not just talking about it that you have it. It's strategically, you got to partner with the right companies, whether that's Silk, whether that's one of our competitors, right? Like at the end of the day, there's plenty of business out there for not only Silk, but our competitors. But really, it's about educating the IMBs. It's really about educating the mortgage lenders of, yes, it's being a narrative, but how do you implement it? And how do you implement it with de-risking it and also executing on it? And I think what we're going to look to display at the conference in a couple of weeks is a turnkey playbook to be able to do that, right? And when it makes sense and how you can have success with it.
I love that. I love how you talked about it like a waterfall. I think the industry could use some insights on what the waterfall is. Like, okay, I've heard about attorney opinion letters. I've heard about insured attorney opinion letters. There's other title alternatives. What is the right scenario to deploy those versus traditional title? And depending on what product you're talking about as well. So that
And
waterfall approach,
every
I think,
lender is different, and every lender has a different appetite for
yeah,
risk, right?
yeah,
What people got to talk about with AOLs is what is the recourse? Like, what is that recourse? If you go to a local law firm, if they get one claim on their E&O, or if they get one claim on their E&O and one on their malpractice, are they out of business? And then where does the risk lie? Is it coming back? Does Fannie go and say, well, sorry, you don't have the outlet over here on that law firm. It's now your buyback, right? No one's gotten into that conversation yet, right?
yeah.
And what does that mean? And when is it applicable? And I really do think through some of what we're doing with tech, it does allow you to get eligibility, right? And then you just got to start talking to the lender of, when do you want to be able to deploy that, right? Because when is that risk in your appetite, and what does your balance sheet look like for that risk? It can't just be, well, hey, I want to do it, therefore I do it. It's really talking through it so that everyone's on the same page, because what do we know in mortgage and title? It's never a problem until it's a problem, right? It's all a great idea until there's a foreclosure. It's all a great idea until there's an issue with the loan, right? And then it's really talking about de-risking those issues and then your coverage behind those issues, right? And I don't think anyone's talked about that other than it being a cheaper alternative.
Yep. Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time today and joining me on Powerhouse. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation in a couple of weeks at the IMB Summit.
It was such a pleasure to be on, and I thank you for the invite. It was an awesome experience. So thank you so much.